Hello, everyone. Hello. Hello, there we go. How's everyone doing? Good. My name's Alex Schneps. I am Events and Programming Manager for WBUR City Space. Thank you so much for coming out today in the afternoon on a Monday. Thank you very much for being here. We've got a really great program, so I'm not going to take up too much of your time. I just wanted to say that if you like what you see here today, as I'm sure you may already know, but you can check out our entire lineup of events at wbur.org/cityspace. We've got events going on all through the week, most weeks throughout the year. So please do come back, and we'll see you here again soon, I hope. But I'd like to introduce our first two guests for today's program. So, Louise Aronson is a leading geriatrician, writer, educator, professor of medicine at the University of California, San Francisco, and the author of the New York Times bestseller, Elderhood, Redefining Aging, Transforming Medicine and Reimagining Life. She is a graduate of Harvard Medical School and the Warren Wilson Program for Writers. Dr. Aronson has received the Gold Professorship in Humanism in Medicine, the California Home Care Physician of the Year Award, and the American Geriatric Society Clinician Teacher of the Year Award. And her work has been featured on Today, CBS This Morning, NPR's Fresh Air, Politico, to name a number of other outlets. And in conversation with her will be Tom Model. Tom is founder and president of CNAP Alliance, Community Networks for Aging in Place Alliance, a nonprofit organization. Through CNAP Alliance, Tom works on bringing events like today's program, part of the Future of Aging program series, to individuals and organizations to help promote understanding of and collective action on issues critical to our aging society. And his purpose is to educate, inform, and promote collaborative efforts that help individuals learn about issues and opportunities related to aging and stimulate solutions to broader longevity society issues. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Tom and Louise and bring them up to the stage.
Well, Louise, let me welcome you to Boston.
Thank you. It's nice to be
And
here.
welcome to City Space. And I had to get an update because I've been involved with WBUR since about 2000. And when I was around when City Space was coming into being, I knew it as being projected as the hub of conversation for Greater Boston. But I've learned from Alex that City Space is now known by what's happening is here. And that's true. They celebrated their one-year anniversary on Friday, and it was enormously successful and so forth.
Great.
So your book, Elderhood, Redefining Aging, Transforming Medicine and Reimagining Life, gives us a collection of essay-like stories and real stories about how people age and how they're treated in society and so forth. Tell us how you came to write the book.
Well, first, I spent a lot of years not writing it, which apparently is part of the process, but painful. I was doing what I like to refer to as my real job. And then I had an idea for it, and I wrote about 3/4 of a draft that was like other doctor books, so I analyzed them in typical neurotic way. And generally, there were 8 to 12 chapters of about 25 to 30 pages each. And so I did that, and about 3/4 of the way through, I thought, I'm bored, and if I'm bored, that's not good for the reader. And then I just decided to get weird. I do think that's one of the best things about aging is that you feel more comfortable just being and doing yourself. And so I decided to do that. And I realized, too, that the structure could help me accomplish the goal. What I wanted to do was take true stories, but also pull from literature and history and science and medicine and show how the way we approach age in each of those areas is intrinsically interrelated to how we approach it in the other areas, that you can't look at any part of that in isolation. Yes, medicine is a mirror for the larger society, but it seemed helpful by doing sort of essayistic and real people plus more, concepts, and really having the weave speak to what it means to be human and an elder human in particular.
I love your stories and your essays. Being an engineer, the facts are always interesting, but the stories are very moving and talk about how people, your essays talk about how people are affected by language, and your choice of elderhood is something that I find particularly interesting, as we talked about. And your stories speak to the facts and feelings and important issues to people as they age in this period that you use the word elderhood for. Mm-hmm. I learned that the hood is a suffix, like knighthood, adulthood, childhood. Tell us, it's been used a little bit in the past, but I think you're the primary focus on it now.
Right, so I didn't make up the word elderhood. I actually tried to find out who did, and I couldn't. My original goal was actually to use the word oldhood, which always gets laughs, yes, unless it's a young audience and they think it's everything the same, basically. But so I did that in the New York Times, convinced that that's what I was going to do, and I was going to do it, I think, for the same reason that it gets laughs, which is that most people don't want to be associated with it. So I wanted to reform the word. Sort of like Black is beautiful, we're here, we're queer. There are any number of social movements that have really said what we are intrinsically is not a bad thing. So we're going to change this language and conversation. But then a reader, after the New York Times thing came out, a reader whom I don't know in New Jersey, nice woman, sends me a note, and she said, "You have a grammatical problem." And she was actually just right? Because if you have childhood, the person is a child. And if you have adulthood, the person is an adult. And if you have oldhood, what's an old, right? So then it became Elderhood, which actually made my publisher hugely happy also.
Well, I like the word elder. It's not very popular in the Western cultures, but in Eastern cultures, there's a lot of reverence and respect for the word elder, which as an elder, I like to think about that would be nice to have. So words play a critical role in how we think and feel about ourselves and how we experience our life. But midway through your book, you touch on language. But throughout your book, you really stress the importance of how words and language impact and describe aging and getting old in general. So just for a moment, let's talk about words. And you've already started on that. You want to digress a little bit more on that?
Sure, happy to. It's really interesting, but every few years there are nationwide studies of the words we use for old age, everything from senior, old, elderly, geriatric, etc. And they survey people about which ones they prefer. So any guesses here, which one's preferred? Older adults, okay. Someone in the know. So really, they don't like any of those words I used. And the one that often gets used is older adults. And actually, in the medical literature, that's the only term you're allowed to use. It's actually mandated. I think it's inherently ageist. Here's why. I'm hoping to change this back. Older is a relative term. A 7-year-old is older than a 5-year-old. A 70-year-old is older than a 60-year-old. It's relative. At some point, and you may not like this, but it's better than being dead, we become old, right? And really my mission is to make that be okay. Because it needs to be okay. We're all becoming older. And until that becomes okay, until we recognize that life has 3 major phases, 3 major acts, like any good play, childhood, adulthood, and elderhood, then it's not okay to grow old. And that's not a good society to live in. You don't want to be apologizing for who you are. Actually, in health terms, as a clinician, I can say that's really bad for your health, and we might want to discuss that more. But and also a population without terminology. So in hospitals, we make adult hospitals and children's hospitals. What do we make for elders? Nursing homes? Not so nice, right? So until you have language, until every time somebody invokes childhood and adulthood, you say, and you need to be talking about elderhood, we have a problem. And until we who are growing older or already old feel comfortable with that terminology and can say it unapologetically, it still becomes something that is negative. If you lower your voice, if you deny it, it means it's bad. And if it's bad, then we're all growing and maturing towards becoming bad. And I refuse to accept that.
Me too. As you touch on in the book and have a section devoted in the book, there's this thing called othering, which is very much tied to the use of words and language. And you talk about how the way in which you're described causes you to think about yourself in certain ways. Well, that's kind of benign compared to where othering can actually lead when you talk about racial discrimination and a lot of other things. Mm-hmm. So I think in terms of the words that are being used, and I'm pleased that you're willing to talk about that here, because I feel for this Future on Aging series that we have, words and language is something I want to keep on the table in the context of a variety of the topics that we'll address. So in terms of othering, you've already spoken to that a bit. Do you have anything particularly in addition to that you want to make a remark on? Or is it how does it create an atmosphere within the medical community? Because as Gawande referred to, one of the problems is the medicalization of old age.
Right.
And you speak to that yourself.
Yeah, and it was actually the sociologist Carol Estes who started talking about the medicalization in the 1970s, and who's done amazing work in aging over the decades. But those are sort of two different things. So I'll go back to othering, and then we can come back to medicalization maybe. But othering is something we do to people who are unlike ourselves. And aging has a little bit of a problem in that we all are born young. So we all start out not old. So old, as we become ourselves, old is other. And I think we've gotten into problems in that because old is sort of disrespected and devalued, we continue to push it. There's that joke book from, I think, a couple decades ago, which is titled, "Old Age is Always 10 Years Older Than I Am." And I see that. It's interesting. And I do think it's counterproductive. One of the reasons I wanted to go with a hood, with an elderhood, is to show that old age has as much length and variety as childhood and adulthood. I mean, think of childhood, a neonate versus a teen or young adult. Those are like almost different species of human animals. And one can argue that that's not so different from a 65-year-old versus my oldest patient was 111. Those are quite different people, and we need to understand that elderhood encompasses all of that. Just as, we have a young adult in our household now, and he's completely different from we are, and not just physically. So it's okay to grow and change. How boring would life be if we didn't?
Well, somebody pointed out to me, because I saw the reference to the fact that there are 4 generations in the elderhood in bracket. And being, again, an engineer, I thought, wait a minute, 30 years per generation, that doesn't work. What they're talking about is the great generation, the silent generation, the baby boomers, and
we're only at boomers now, yeah.
Pardon?
The boomers, not all boomers have reached elderhood yet.
No, that's true. So 3 generations maybe.
3.
So I read the wrong number.
Unless there are some at the very extreme on the other end, yes.
In terms of how language affects people, it's not just that it affects them in the way that they're treated, but in the way they think about themselves. And going back to the othering statement, when I first started thinking about that, I've never been particularly affected by thinking about or worrying about being old. But I began to realize when I thought about the term othering that there's so much of the language and the words coming at you that I suddenly realized that I'm becoming susceptible a little bit to othering myself. Mm-hmm. Which is really where you get in trouble, because then it's kind of like with the coronavirus now. My wife and I are thinking of going on a trip, and we thought, well, should we go? But she said, well, lock yourself in the closet. You're not going to get it, but what kind of a life are you going to live?
Right.
So that's the issue with dealing with that.
Right. Well, and I also think there is abundant data from many researchers, but one of the best ones is a woman called Becca Levy, who's a psychologist at Yale, who has really looked at how our feelings about old age influence our health. And what she has shown is that people who look at old age positively live longer and healthier than those who are negative about old age. So the people with a positive attitude about aging and old people are less likely to have Alzheimer's markers in their cerebrospinal fluid, are more likely to recover after a hospital stay, are less likely to die of heart disease. I mean, these are really good things, and it sort of makes sense, because if you have a negative attitude about it, then you're devaluing yourself, and that's always bad and stressful. And you may not make an effort. We actually have abundant research data in medicine that things like exercise make a difference. Actually, we only have data going up to age 99, but I'm going to go out on a scientific limb and say that if you can build muscle and improve your life at 99, I bet you could do it at 101 or 109 as well. So I think attitude really matters, and there is a growing body of literature, articles in the last 6 months, even in the best medical journals, about positivity and optimism and health outcomes, and it's really influential. So that sort of brings us back to the language, like owning it, saying, yes, I'm old, or yes, I'm an elder, as if it's matter of fact, not as if it's something where people say, oh, you're not, or oh, you look great. It's like, no. I am. It's fine. I'm good with it. You should be too.
Well, if we go to the title of the program today, Age is Not a Medical Condition, Healthy Living After 50, I think the first, that just hits somebody, they tend to think about healthy living after 50, exercise, what do I eat, how do I take care of myself? But these other factors that influence how you think about yourself, as you point out, is extremely important, and it really influences you perhaps more fundamentally.
Right. Well, and that's the medicalization, right? Think about the things, although not that medicine is so good on diet and exercise because it doesn't get compensated. But if you're talking about health as opposed to medicine, then diet and exercise are key. But it's also valuing other areas of thought and humanity, such as our psychological state, our sexual state, our spiritual state. All those things are critical to health.
Well, maybe it's enough on the words, and there are a lot of other things to go into here. When I first came across your book, I listened to you on Terry Gross's Fresh Air program, and just a snippet in the car, and you were talking about medications and how medications are tested out on people that are, quote, adults, and if you take that same medication, apply it to a child, you might be in deep trouble, or if you provide it to someone who's old, you might be in trouble. And so that's motivated me, I have to say, a narrow perspective as to why I wanted to get your book. But when I read it, I saw there was so much more in it. You mentioned that you might like to read a few quotes from your book, which I have right here.
Did I mention that?
Yeah.
Panic setting in. What will I read?
While you're doing that, let me mention, in handing this over to Louise to have a broader discussion about Elderhood, the book, and the significance of the noun elderhood, which we talked about. There's a quote that I found from the Harvard Medicine magazine that says, from Louise, now alongside childhood and elderhood, the vast majority of us can also expect a third act, or elderhood, that begins at 60 or 70 and lasts for decades. This third act is not a repeat of the first or second. More often, it is in life what it is in drama, the site of our story's climax, denouement, and resolution.
Yeah, that's a lot of good action going on there, right? It's the key part of the story, and it's actually many of the meaning-making years, which we learned that especially people who thrive are very focused on meaning and purpose. So this is another area that matters, and society tends to give the wrong messages. So this issue of retirement, and actually bringing this up is sometimes unpopular. I was on a French radio show last week, and they were like, there's apparently a big controversy in France because they want to change the retirement age from 62 to 64. Which still seems rather young to me. So in the United States, it was set at 65 when on average we died at 67. And now on average we die at 79. People can say, well, I'm entitled to retirement. And I guess I think of it a couple of ways. One is this new long elderhood is unprecedented for our species in human history. There's another phase of life you're probably all familiar with that was unprecedented until about 100 years ago, around the time of the child labor laws in the mid-1800s and the Industrial Revolution some years later, and that's called adolescence. And now sometimes it appears to go on for, I don't know, a very long time, right? It keeps getting bigger. So that's what this phase of elderhood is doing also. And in some ways, we're really lucky because we are the generations that get to figure out what that looks like, and that's exciting. That's an opportunity for self-reinvention, for creativity, for all sorts of things. It's also important to note that retirement as we know it now did not exist until the Industrial Revolution, when they realized that men, once they reached about 40, it was only men that they were thinking about then, just like I'm not leaving out women intentionally, this is what the historical record shows. But when men got to about 40 or 45, they were less efficient on the machines, and so they had to try and figure out how to phase them out or transition them to different functions. And so retirement came in, but it's kind of an epiphenomenon of the 20th century. So through most of history, if you were really rich, you retired, and if you were really poor and your family didn't take you in, you ended up in these poorhouses. As if being old was the same as having a mental illness. And in between, people scrape things together. But I think we can do better than that. And the more intentional we are in approaching that, the happier our elderhoods will be. Which means maybe we retire from original jobs, particularly if they were physically taxing in ways that are no longer safe or comfortable. And maybe we retire from them because we worked so hard for so many years and we no longer want to work. I mean, at my institution, 60 hours is considered the norm, and most people will do more than that. So one of the reasons I'm looking forward to my elderhood is to do less than that, and to do all these other things I keep talking about more regularly. So maybe we have this notion of encore career or a different career. It's fewer hours a week. Maybe you have more control over it. People in their 70s are the fastest growing segment of the American workforce, and one of the biggest groups of entrepreneurs. Now, part of that is in response to ageism, because they can't get jobs. I've got patients who say they won't even be allowed to volunteer, like really highly educated, high-functioning, physically fit people who aren't allowed to volunteer because of the birth date attached to their name or CV. And so people are inventing things themselves, and they're actually sometimes inventing things that are going to make elderhood better, because who knows better? I live near Silicon Valley, and these 22-year-olds come in and pitch these things, and they have clearly never met a person over 50.
Well, on retirement, let me just inject something that I experienced. When I finished graduate school and I went to work at Bell Laboratories was part of the AT&C system, and they tracked everything forever, for decades. And I learned that their tracking said that the typical retiree at around age 65 lived 2 years beyond retirement. And I saw that actually take place to my next door neighbor, who also worked at Bell Laboratories. Mm-hmm. And so if retirement, as I understand it, at least in terms of the Social Security, goes back to the 30s when Roosevelt came in. And people worked very hard. My father, who would be well over 100 now, talked about scraping bathtubs when he came to this country when he was about 10 or 11 years old, and went on to do other things, but worked very, very hard. And so the idea of retirement, where you didn't have to work physically as hard, and of course all that has changed in our information age and so forth and so on.
Well, the computers enable all sorts of things that weren't possible before, and they're also working on I think more and more things so that the rest of us can see it. You know, again, I think that the prototype makers were in their 20s with perfect vision. I've never had perfect vision, and there's nothing about growing older that has improved that situation. So, you know, sometimes things are so little, and I'm always making everything bigger, but that's making it easier. And there are things, you know, there are different ways the body can change. And so thinking about a work that lines up with who you are and what's comfortable for you. But for some people, they want to do more in their area of expertise, and other people want to do something completely different. Maybe you were responsible and did the sort of work that that would make enough money or get health insurance for your family, or maybe you were busy raising your family and now you want to do something completely different. That's an opportunity. Or maybe you were in manual labor, and now I travel a lot, so I'm often in shuttles and Ubers with people who have retired from one career and are doing this, and when I ask them why they're doing it, they're like, I just talk to interesting people all day long. I love that. I never got to do it before. It's that kind of attitude that helps. There was a study a couple years ago looking at men who retired at 62 and men who were matched otherwise for personal and health characteristics and did not retire. And the men who retired were more likely to die. And I think that has something to do with identity and purpose. because we know that's bad for you. So what I'm talking about now with my patients in my aging clinic is if you're going to retire, make some plans. And sometimes it might be, a lot of people need a year just to sort things out. But have some reason to get up in the morning, something that's making you feel happy and a person who counts in the world in some way. And that can be anything from you're the person who picks up the grandkids at school and you walk home from them and you teach them things and they teach you things, and that's just a joy. Or it can be starting a new company, or it can be picking up a new instrument, or something like that really makes a difference. And I fear that because, we plan for adolescence, we plan for people to go into the workforce or to go to college, but we don't necessarily help people plan for a successful retirement, right? They're the golf jokes and the places where people are just sitting around watching television. That doesn't lead to a happy, healthy, meaningful life for most people. And at the same time, we have to recognize that what makes life meaningful varies. It's as individual as we all are.
For many people, of course, they have had a hard life and a hard work life. So when it comes to retirement, it's natural that they would think of a release from all those burdens. But a growing portion of the population now is not in that situation, but I think culturally people are attuned to that kind of an attitude, subconsciously or consciously.
Right, and well, because it's also the messages we're sending. It's sort of like the messages about the words for old, and we need to push back on that because society also says, on the one hand, older adults are a burden, and on the other hand, we're not going to hire you because you're old. You can't have it both ways. So when people start making those comments, we need to push back and say, so how do you see this working? And we also don't say like, oh, you had a baby. What a burden. I'm so sorry. There are different phases of life, and are children a burden? Heck yes. If anybody's had them, they know. But that doesn't mean they aren't also a pleasure, and a source of meaning and some of the things that matter most to people in their lives. Burden isn't necessarily bad. And if we label the years we need help, and most of us, unless we die suddenly, and most people do not die suddenly, are going to need some help again. And if you actually get really down and dirty on life, most of us need help most days, every day of our lives. Is it more overt at some phases than others? Yes, and that's okay. That makes you human. It doesn't make you a failure.
In terms of attitude and thinking about what's coming, I think you have the statistics in your book. People tend to think, oh, I'm getting old, I'll be in an assisted living or nursing home. The actual numbers of people is very, very low. And do you recall those numbers? Because I was really struck by them.
Yeah, so assisted living is, it varies a lot by where you live, but it's definitely less than 10%. And all these things go up with age, so it depends if you're talking people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 100s. There's also been such a blurring between nursing homes and assisted living over time that it's making it sort of confusing. And nursing homes are tiny percents of people. It's actually a great trick to do with students, because they see old as 50 plus or whatever, so what percent are living? And they're like, 70%, 50%, and at any given time, it's just a few percent, although our lifetime risk is higher. For women, it's upwards of 20%, the last figures that I saw. Women are more likely to end up in nursing homes, partly because they're more likely to live into advanced old age. And for heterosexual couples, they're more likely to have cared for their spouse, which brings up another favorite topic of mine, which is, in what other group of people would we allow men to die so many years earlier, allow one group to die? I mean, men die years earlier than women, and we don't consider that a public health crisis? I mean, usually when we have that kind of health disparity, we address it. So another reason to really own old age and speak up for it is there is this health disparity that's not being addressed, and that's not okay.
It's a little bit off the topic, but one of the things about the aging population is that society and individuals think of it as only in terms of the burdens. And I've tried to point out about the opportunities, because there are so many people with talents and energy and health to be able to do things, that there's a real resource that has to be tapped into. And I don't think that's happening yet, although I know some people that are working on that.
Yeah, good. I mean, I think we all need to work on it. I was talking about those patients. I had a couple in a row and then a friend at a New Year's Eve party. And and some of them are willing to work for free. These are advantaged people. So people turning that away are doing it to the detriment of all of us. And it sort of brings me back to the othering, because we do so often think of old as other when we're young, that they don't sort of realize they're creating the future of their own nightmares when they make that sort of decision. And so somehow making it clear that we are all, what my colleague Joanne Lynn aptly said, old people in training until we are actually old people, and to somehow narrow that gap. But that also takes a lot more intergenerational interactions than happen, and also ones where you acknowledge the strengths, what you just said, as well as the limitations. So you'll often hear like, oh, I got behind someone old in the grocery store and it took forever. It's like, well, coming out of the hotel on my way here today, I was walking into a young person on his phone who was, and the guy was twice my size, and he would have barreled me down because he was looking at his phone. That too seems problematic. But you don't hear as much about that, and you don't hear it as a failing of his entire age group and social cohort, right?
Well, there are all these both conscious and subconscious things that are built into our view of age and people that are aging. And I know people I've been working with have all experienced the same thing, where you're working with somebody and they're very excited about your talents and so forth. And they begin to get you involved, but then there's a backing off. And we used to think that they didn't want to pay us money, but those of us who have run large organizations said, we have to admit that if we were getting somebody involved, it wasn't just the money we would pay them, but the fact that they would be deeply involved with the project. And hey, this guy's almost 80 years old. He might die next week. Well, that's a false premise. Mm-hmm. But it's, as I say, conscious or subconsciously, it biases what goes on and the ability to tap into those resources.
It does. And people think, children are our future, or, we want to get, I was at a talk last night and somebody said, we want to get young people excited about these topics. And I didn't interrupt, which was my inclination, but nobody interrupted at any other point, so it would have been bad news. But I really wanted to say, don't we want to get everybody excited about these topics? And there's also a truth in the workplace today, which is most young people don't stay in jobs very long. They switch and switch and switch, and that is the new norm. And people are actually having to make titles within companies because they're finding that the youngest generation, the people in their 20s, if they don't get what they see as a promotion, within 6 to 12 months, they start looking for another job. So it might be that if you give a job to an 80-year-old, you've got more staying power.
Excuse me for stepping out. Alex, is that right? Is that 30 seconds left for our 40 minutes? Okay, somehow
Time
my watch is
flies.
off. You didn't get to read your passages, but what would be a final comment? What would you like to leave behind for people to think about as they buy your book and read it?
I would say just own old age and elderhood. Try to speak about it without othering. A whole group of aging organizations a few years ago got the Frameworks Institute to look into this, and this has changed how I use the we and us whenever I talk about old age, so that it's not them. As a young geriatrician, it was still them, and my younger colleagues are still talking about them, our patients. And also, if you are old or about to be old, I'm still in my 50s, but because I grew my hair out, not to be a hypocrite for this book, I happily dyed it for decades. Anyway, so now I'm owning it. But to my students, 56, 76, it's all the same. So I've started using old just as a matter-of-fact thing, and it's really amazing the impact you can have.
Well, I think we're at the Q&A period, and Alex has a microphone, and let's open it up for questions for Louise.
I don't have a virus, I'm just joking.
No questions? I can't believe that.
There's one. And over there.
Right in the middle. That's all right.
Thank you. I'd like to ask you about your opinion on the relationship between people's attitudes towards older people and the way in which older people present themselves to the rest of the world. And my experience has been this, that I think of myself as an old person. I'm 71 years old. Mm-hmm. But I don't present myself, I think, as an old, frail person. So one of the things I do is take advantage of Boston University's Evergreen program, which allows older adults to take classes together with the younger students. I've done that for about 12 classes or so.
That's great.
And I was it's a wonderful program. I was very concerned at the beginning when I first started this that the younger students would treat me as the other, the frail, senile guy, you know. That has never happened, not at all. And I think both the professors in general and the students welcome people, older people, as part of a community of lifelong learners. And so I'm wondering to what degree you can prevent this idea of othering exhibited by other people in the way you yourself behave as an older person. If you behave as an old, frail, needy person that has nothing to contribute to the world, that's how other people treat you. If you don't behave that way, people treat you with greater respect. And that's probably is that the most effective way of dealing with the othering issue?
Well, it's really interesting how to approach this. On the one hand, you should present yourself always as what you are at all phases. And, you know, it's sort of like when you say, you know, I'm a 71-year-old who goes to this program, then you shouldn't have to defend against being frail. It's sort of like being a teenager. You're not going to ask for a bottle or start crawling around on the floor. It's a different life stage, right? At the same time, when you say, like, I'm not old and frail, that is othering our future selves. So I do think one of the things that happens consistently in the sort of pro-aging or anti-ageism movement is a sort of internalized or within elderhood ageism that we all need to be careful of. Like, of course you shouldn't be seen as frail. You're not frail yet. And the goal, like, there's this notion of successful aging as you remain healthy forever. That doesn't happen. Also, death is not optional so far, right? So the goal, I think, of successful aging as you live the entire arc of a human life. And at some point, that's going to include frailty. So prepare for it. Think of what sort of agency you want to have in that thing. Think of who you want to care for it. And we need to lobby for caregiving, right? In terms of medicalization, the most important thing is the care you receive. And the life you get to live, and that's not considered something we pay for. So absolutely, like, doing Evergreen is fabulous because it helps people see old not just as frail, and we need to say that even if you are frail, doesn't mean you're not a human being of value. So I think that's a great way, and it's actually showing them the range of old age, which sometimes they don't see and which the media stereotypes don't accurately portray. And let's be careful about othering the frail, because most of us will get there. And when we get there, we want it to be a place that's nice to be at.
Welcome to Boston. First, I bring greetings from a colleague of yours when you were in medical school, Debbie Shee. She said to say hello.
Wow, thank you.
Actually, your last comment builds on what my question is regarding public policy. About 55 years ago, we had a plethora of public policy, especially at the federal level. Old Americans Act, enactment of Medicare, elder housing. Today, it's crickets. Among all the candidates running for president, if you go through their policies, and some of them have extensive plans, there's nothing that is overtly speaking to elderhood or advancing age in the society. What's your perspective on the fact that we don't have an overarching sense of public policy regarding elderhood?
I think it's suicidal as a culture and individually. I think some of the leading candidates are afraid to touch the third rail of their age, right? There was actually a great article in the Washington Post about the ways they were making everybody look sort of more lively. I guess it's not just plastic surgery, but you can spray stuff on the face to give it a sheen that transmits subconsciously your vitality. Anyway, so I guess you could try this at home. But yeah, we absolutely need policy. And that's another reason. I mean, this sort of brings us back to the language, because we have policies for childhood and adulthood. So when we have an elderhood, we will need elderhood policies. And again, people are worried about this burden. And I think every time people talk about the burden or the aging population, we need to say, this is not an individual problem. I mean, this is the issue, is that we have, we let everybody suffer. And it's universal. But each family suffers on its own. I have super smart, highly successful classmates contacting me about their parents in ways that they did not contact, former high school or college classmates about how to raise their children. And there's actually also a lot of information out there. I will say that, through most of my career, there just wasn't much information about aging in the public media. And 10 years ago, I started seeing stuff more regularly, maybe monthly, and then 5 years ago, weekly, and now I can't keep up. So, and that's part of all of us making a difference, but that has to accrue to policy, and unfortunately that happens pretty slowly. But if you're voting, or if you're going to speak to any of these people or sending letters, I mean, we need to speak up. And this sort of speaks to your comment also, it's about owning unapologetically the age. I retell a story from the writer Vivian Gornick in the book, who talks about on a really wintry day in New York, there had been construction somewhere and there was a platform, and she's about to cross it, and she sees what she calls as an impossibly old, thin man. And so she wordlessly puts out her hand, and he wordlessly takes it, and he comes across and he says, "Thank you." And then she writes, "A thrill ran through me." And then she goes on for a paragraph about something else, and you're thinking, why was that thrilling? Like, that seemed kind of ordinary and dull. And she said it was the way he said thank you, as if what she had done wasn't a big deal. And this is one of the ways we don't other the later phases of old age, right? We make it an okay deal, but we have to normalize. And the other thing I loved about that was that when she was the young person in that thing, I think she was 74 or 75, right? So really appreciating, but also not leaving people out there and not apologizing for needs. There's a lot about, old people use up too much of the healthcare dollar. Well, I don't know, young people use a heck of a lot of the education dollar. And the other big spender is, military, defense, police, and that's about adults. And we don't give them trouble, although we probably should in that regard. But anyway, so push back against these prejudices, because we have different needs at different life stages, and that's because we're changing and growing and successfully aging.
Hey, wow. This is, oh, yes, hi. So I actually came here, I'm a Northeastern nursing student, and I wanted to come here today because geriatrics is one of my areas of interest, that in psychology. And I was really struck by the continuing education. In the cohort that I'm in, there's a gentleman who is, I think he said he was 60. He used to be in nuclear physics, so sometimes he'd talk about all these science things would go whoosh right over the rest of our heads. But he told a story about his mother, who's a nurse, and she's 80 and she's still working. And then my mom has a dentist who's still a dentist and has been her dentist since she was 18, and maybe he was just out of med school. But I was adopted by older parents, so I've been exposed to the elderhood community. And I'm in my med-surg clinical right now, and it's really interesting to see the list of patients. And I've seen people who are 94. The oldest person in the hospital at one point was 108, and just that was really amazing to me. And I guess one of the things is, as a nursing student, I guess what would you recommend for young nurses coming into a population where I have heard a statistic that there are more people who are in elderhood or approaching elderhood than people my age. I'm 26, in living in the world today. What would you recommend for us in our treatment?
Great question. I don't know as much about your particular nursing school, but I know in medical schools they devote months to pediatrics and years to adult medicine, but just a few weeks to geriatrics. So demand that you are trained to take care of the patients you will be taking care of, because the body changes. Tom, you mentioned earlier about medications. And people say, well, the problem I'm having can't be that medication. I've been taking it forever. But over time, a few things it's worth knowing. So most medications weren't tested on old people, right? Mandates to include women and people of color came in 86. Mandates to include children in medical research came in 98. Mandate to include elders came in 2019, last year. It just had its 1-year anniversary. So demand that you know and teach yourself as much as you can. That's what I ended up doing. I was an adult doctor and I was seeing lots of old people and I thought, how do I not know what I'm doing? Then over time, also the body changes. Like we know that. The outside changes in us mirror the inside changes. So we need to understand the physiology and the pathophysiology and how we metabolize drugs. There are so many different ways. So really asking and then being enthusiastic. So still in medical schools, if somebody say they're interested in geriatrics, most responses like, oh, you'll get over it. Or, oh, you're actually a really good student. Don't you want to do something else? Right? So just don't take that garbage. And I will also note something interesting that you said, which was that you had older parents. And what we find among geriatricians is that most of us had an older person in our lives whom we loved. So the more we have intergenerational contact with young people, the more people will be inspired to work with older people. It really does make a difference. And although there may be more older people than there are people in your age group, what has in fact happened is that we've gone as a society from a population pyramid shape, so tons of kids, fewer adults, and hardly any elders, to one that is more of a column shape, about equal numbers in all the different areas. And that is, demographers say that will be the case going forward as far as we can see. So it's the new normal, and we need to invent what that is. And if you focus on aging, you're likely to have a long and successful career. So congratulations.
Louise, why don't you recount what we talked about before about the new head of geriatrics or geriatrician at
Okay. So Tom was mentioning one of my former colleagues. She actually was recruited to Mass General from UCSF. So Christine Ritchie is the new head of geriatrics and palliative care at MGH. And she's wonderful. And I guess she was giving a talk that you heard where she was saying that geriatrics is one of the few subspecialties. So we do a specialty in adult medicine or family medicine, and then you do a fellowship. The way some people focus on an organ, so the heart or the lungs or the kidneys, we focus on older people. And my former boss used to say this, that it's one of the only subspecialties whereby getting more training, skill, and knowledge, you can be paid less and respected less throughout your career. And so then you might ask, why do people do it? Well, when they do surveys of physician specialists for satisfaction, we always come out on top. We love what we're doing. Because if you do something because you believe in it, because it feeds you, because it's actually so much fun and interesting and the options are endless, you are a happy person, and there's nothing better you can ask for from a life, given that like no doctor is making a salary he or she should complain about.
One more question.
Hi, I'm struggling with my kids who are adults and parents, and I keep hearing these really, they think it's sort of cute comments about my husband and me, and I'm getting more furious, but I don't know, I feel as if I'm crawling up this wall and I can't get to the top. What do I say to them?
Can you give us one example so that I'm sure I know what you're talking about?
To tell you one example. I have a son who has he can be very funny or he can be really obnoxious. And he likes to call my husband geezer. Oh, that's the geezer, or the milestone of turning 70. Oh my goodness, it's like you have to retire because you're getting really old. And I don't know how to counter that in a productive way, but I'm seeing it seep into my life, and I'm getting mad.
And can they tell you're getting mad? No, okay. I was thinking maybe they were eliciting a reaction, then they want to go back for more. I guess I would say a few things. One is think about, are you getting mad because it's associating, like the geezer comment has negative associations? Do we just need to grab that word and play with it? Like, yeah, I'm a geezer who, really enjoys my encore career, or I'm a geezer who's running for president, or I'm a geezer who's running a multinational corporation. So what? If Mark Zuckerberg can be a billionaire at 12, then why can't you be a billionaire as a geezer? So some of it might be owning that, and other things are saying, well, you could counter with facts. I mean, different things work on different people, but you could say, well, people used to retire at 70 because they were physically and psychologically much older than people are now. So I think you're a little out of date, son, because actually, 70. And I don't like 70 as the new 50 because it means 70 isn't good and 50 is better, whereas actually studies show 70-year-olds are happier than 50-year-olds. So another fact you can drop. So, maybe he's envious because you're in the happier phase of life and he's in the least happy. He's in the nadir. He's nervous, worried about you guys. Then you can say something like, I really appreciate your concern. And am I likely to need your help? Yes. But unless we can discuss this in a collaborative, sort of friendly way, it's going to be harder on all of us. So I don't need your help now, but absolutely I want to have a conversation. And a lot of people tell me their kids don't want to have, they're like, oh, that's depressing. No, it's not depressing. I mean, yes, maybe it's depressing. Okay, it's sometimes depressing, admittedly. But it's less depressing if you have these conversations, because by having the conversations about how and where you're going to age and who's going to help, you get control over it, and you also decrease the burden on your kids and grandkids. So it's a win-win. The parts you don't like, those are the parts we can't really control very well, except for diet and exercise. But eventually it happens to all of us. So I think maybe I'd counter with facts, or saying, like, I'm wondering if you're making, could we have a serious conversation? I'm wondering if you're making these comments because there's something else we should be discussing, and don't assume you know what it is. But I'm feeling uncomfortable, and I'm wondering if maybe you are too. Just in a friendly way, maybe not with everyone there, so that he can feel comfortable being a bit vulnerable.
Louise, we'll have to close this off. The time just flew by, and I want to thank you so much for coming here and taking time out from the TEDMed conference. You can go back and get your makeup now, and we can look for you on YouTube. And
I'll hopefully be the one who doesn't stumble through her memorized talk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. We'll move on now. They'll be setting up some chairs here to the panel discussion portion of the program. If people want to get up and stretch for a minute, this will probably be your best opportunity to do so. And Joanne Montpar, who I had the pleasure and honor of knowing for the last year or so, will be the moderator for a panel discussion. Joanne is professor of psychology and director of the Rosemary B. Fuss Center for Research on Aging and Intergenerational Studies at LaSalle University, a distinctive intergenerational campus that is home to LaSalle Village. Joanne's research explores lifespan issues with special attention to age-related social attitudes and self-experiences of aging. She's a passionate champion of the age-friendly university. Witness the comment that you made. The age-friendly university is a big movement now that's taking root. And it's a global initiative launched by Dublin City University, Ireland, and it's endorsed by the GSA's Academy for Gerontology in Higher Education, as well as the Mass Gerontology Association. Joanne, oh, there you are. So I'll pass the microphone over to you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
A wonderful conversation. Like, the only thing we needed is a couple of bottles of wine, right? Wouldn't that have been wonderful to sit around? So what we're going to do now is we have this wonderful panel joining us, and I will introduce each of our colleagues. Some of you maybe even know a number of individuals, because we have such a great group of colleagues working on critical aging issues in the Boston area. And so how we've planned to do this is we have crafted a set of questions, and we'll work our way through those questions, but certainly activities like this can take on a life of their own. And so it'll be interesting to see what kind of a conversation we all end up having. We will also save some time for questions from you. I know a number of you had your hands up and you didn't get a chance to ask Louise a question, but certainly you can bring that question back. And then Tom will come back and finish everything up for us at the end of the hour. So let me begin by introducing everyone. Our first panelist is Jan Hively. Jan Hively. Jan writes, inspired by the Hopi elder saying, "We are the ones we have been waiting for." Co-founded the global Pass It On network of positive aging advocates with her Paris-based colleague, Maura Allen, in 2013. Pass It On is the third of 3 flourishing peer networks that Jan has co-founded since earning her PhD in 2001 at the age of 69, with a dissertation on productive aging in rural communities. Now a member of the Sloan Research Network on Aging and Work at Boston College, Jan came to her encore career after a career in city planning and administration. Welcome, Jan. We also have with us Lisa Krinsky. Lisa is the director of the LGBT Aging Project at the Fenway Institute at Fenway Health. She is a national leader in LGBT cultural competency training for mainstream aging service providers, as well as policy and practice issues impacting LGBT older adults and caregivers. Lisa is a founding member of the Massachusetts Special Commission on LGBT Aging, and she is a featured subject matter expert in the film Gen Silent, which is a brilliant, compelling, and internationally acclaimed documentary about LGBT aging and caregiving. Welcome, Lisa. We also have with us Professor Sarah Lamb. Sarah is professor of anthropology at Brandeis University and a leading scholar of aging and cultural context. As an Andrew Carnegie Fellow selected in 2019, Professor Lamb is currently examining notions of successful aging as they play out differently in North America, India, and China. She is the author of several books, including a volume entitled Successful Aging as a Contemporary Obsession. Her aim is to help people envision more humane possibilities for making lives meaningful in old age. Welcome, Sarah. And last but certainly not least is Dr. Terry O'Malley. Terry received degrees from Amherst College and Cornell University Medical College, followed by a primary care residency at MGH, where he has continued on staff and teaches medical residents and geriatric fellows. Terry has had a long interest in communications among providers of healthcare and support services. And he is currently a member of the Federal Health Information Technology Advisory Committee, and he co-chairs the U.S. Core Data for Interoperability Task Force. Welcome, Terry. So I'm going to have a seat here. The first thing we're going to ask our panelists is to give us a reflection, a few comments about what they took away from the conversation that Tom and Louise had about elderhood. So let's start way at the end and ask Jan, if you could lead us off with a reflection.
I guess the first thing is that I really like the word elderhood. It's like neighborhood, whatever. But I did want to comment on the fact that I don't think of it necessarily as a stage. I think of it because it expresses a goal. Because from my perspective, becoming an elder is something that we should be striving toward. The word elder to me, like the Hopi Indian elder that has inspired me, has to do with making sure that we care for the 7th generation beyond us. That to me, that sense of purpose, and it can be that the artwork that I'm doing looks as if it has some value for someone else. It's anything that has value for others. But there is a tending to the garden. I think of Greta Thunberg, for example, as an elder. Because I don't think of it necessarily as connected to age. But I do think that because of our wisdom and experience thanks to the durability of our experience, as we integrate that and become the person that we have the power to become, that is our goal. That's my goal, to be an elder. So that would be one comment that I would make. And I do think that the title of her book is very special, and I'll plan to use that expression from now on, elderhood.
I had many thoughts, one of which was we didn't have nearly enough time for the conversation. So glad we have a chance to continue it now. I guess one of the pieces that struck me was this concept about othering and thinking about it from the experience of the LGBTQ community. We have a lifetime of othering. So this is not a new insult that is coming to anyone to kind of adjust to it. And thinking a little bit then about that intersectionality and about the identities that we hold, and when we have some identities that are revered and respected, and when we have some identities that are demeaned and undervalued, and what happens when all of those sort of come in and mix together. And also reminded that there's an amazing group that is called OLOC, and their title is Old Lesbians Organizing for Change. And this is sort of a social justice and a community building group. And it's old lesbians. It's not older relative to someone else. And they are very insistent and strident about both using the word old, and that when you introduce yourself, you say your name, Lisa Krinsky, where you're from, LGBT Aging Project, and your age. So I am 56. I've just come out to you all. The other thing is I consider myself an emerging elder.
Great, exactly.
So I really, really enjoyed Dr. Aronson's talk and her book. I recommend it if you haven't read it yet. And one of the key messages, as you've seen, which really resonates with the work I try to do also as a cultural anthropologist, is just to help us think of old age in a way that it is okay. It's part of the human life course and the human experience. And I study the U.S. society and culture, as well as India and a few other places, through teaching and research. And we are, in the U.S., quite unusual to the extent we try to sort of push away old age and hide it and deny its meaning. It's kind of odd and peculiar, really, the extent that we do it. And I try to think about that through fieldwork, chatting with people, old people, and reading also our popular discourse. There's so much discourse these days on healthy, successful aging. And so one place I do fieldwork is buying those books like How Not to Die, Live Young Forever, Younger Next Year. I mean, there's just a ton of those books out there, big bestsellers, and kind of try to analyze the assumptions. And so partly this healthy, successful aging movement I've seen has been very inspiring to many people, because it can, in positive ways, because it can help sort of revision how we see aging and old age as something that can be very vibrant and healthy and lively and positive, something that you have control over through personal lifestyle choices, like Dr. Aronson said, exercise, eating well, positive attitude, going and doing things, learning, being active, etc. But partly it is also ageist at its core, because it does imply that if you do become frail, then you have failed at aging, at being a successful person, and doesn't well enough teach people how to deal with those changes in life that we all hope we'll get to. We'll get to changes in older age if we live long enough. And I do see in my fieldwork with older people here in the United States that there is a lot of people they're very proud of themselves, like, I'll volunteer for your study, I'm so successful. But yet the people who do experience some frailty or a cancer diagnosis will often then say how profoundly embarrassed they feel. And that, like, I got a cancer diagnosis, I was so embarrassed, I was so ashamed I was going to die, I couldn't tell anyone, or I need a cane, it's so embarrassing. And it can suck if you used to love to run and now you need a cane or to get cancer. I'm not pretending it's all cheery and easy, but should it be embarrassing? No. So that's one of my aims in my work, and Louise Aronson also conveys in her book really beautifully. And so that's one of my takeaway messages. Just, let's figure out ways to make the old age more meaningful in all its parts, its vibrancy and its more difficult changes.
Very interesting. So I'm a clinician, and what struck me that Dr. Aronson, also a geriatrician, how little she spoke about clinical medicine, except for the riff on medications. Right? And the striking thing, so again, it just shows that elderhood is not necessarily related to medical care, or that medical care necessarily, and in her book she makes it very clear, necessarily accelerates people through the path of elderhood in ways that are good. Right? But the word that struck me, and it's the word that Jan used, and that was purpose. Okay? And purpose is not something that makes it into medical curriculum. Right? What's purpose? I mean, why is that valuable? That's not like a blood pressure that I can measure. It's not, I don't have a treatment for it. I can't give people purpose. I can't say, take 3 of these a day, call me in the morning when you find purpose, let me know. So it's really, purpose in many ways is elusive, and yet it is probably at the heart of elderhood. Mm-hmm. And so having achieved elderhood, you achieve it with a bunch of skills and capabilities, and to harness those and aim them towards a purpose becomes not only good for you, but good for everyone else. And I think that overall was the message I took from not only her talk, but also her book, which I highly recommend. Right? So it's homework that I had to do. I haven't had to do homework in years, but I had to read the book before getting up here. So I was struck by purpose.
Well, your comments we're going to pick up in some of the questions that we have, but let's start with this question. My background is a social developmental psychologist. I've been teaching a course in adult development and aging for 30 plus years. And there are 2 things that have profoundly impacted how I teach the course. One is that I teach now at an intergenerational campus at LaSalle Village, so I have students between the ages of 18 and 98 in my course. And the other thing that's impacted how I approach some of the issues is that I'm now 65. And so I've aged with this course. So I'm going to use that experience to pose the question to our panel, which is, have your views, insights, or reactions about aging changed as you've gotten older? What role might our own personal aging experiences as members of this aging population, this historic aging population, play in how we frame old age now and in the future? And Louise talked a little bit about that as well. We are part of this change that's happening. So how does that play out in how you've experienced the issues and how you'll see them going forward?
I had rather an extreme example, I think. In 1999, I was ready to do my PhD dissertation, and it was going to be on life work because I was working with young people around Minnesota, which is where I came from, with life planning, beginning in the first or second grade, where they would lay out goals and talk about how they were going to get to them. And that was part of their process. And then a governor, this was all being done with grants from the state of Minnesota around the state. Then the governor that was elected, Jesse Ventura, a wrestler who was pretty ignorant of public administration, appointed a woman who had been the head of his personal PTA in his town as the chairman of the Department of Education. And she eliminated our Office of Life Work Planning and all the contracts that I had, so that was the end of it. So what to do? And I had been working with districts around the state and, really understanding the huge issue of aging because of the fact that many towns in rural communities had a majority of people over the age of 65. What was going on in there? How are they surviving? So I decided to, because I knew how productive many of those people had been, to do this what ended up earning my doctorate, which was on life work planning, but productive aging in rural communities. When I started, I'd been part of a panel in which people said, so how long do you expect to live? And I said, well, maybe 80, because my husband had died at 80, and that was the age. And now I saw the results from this survey, And it was so exciting. It really created knowledge, the impact, because these were phenomenally productive people. And it was because that's who they were. That's all there were in that town. And if you own a grocery store and you're the only grocery store in town, you're going to keep it open. If the nearest nursing home is 60 miles away, you're going to take care of that neighbor. You're going to help with the repair. And so over 60% were volunteering, and et cetera. And the wonderful thing was that in the 90% felt good about themselves and felt as if they were in control of their lives and felt this sense of freedom. And then my career is based upon the fact that they also answered a question that said, would you be interested in taking some coursework, education, more education, if it were short-term and inexpensive? And 43% answered yes. So I could take that to the president of the university and say, could I start the Vital Aging Network, which was the first step. And now I'm 88 now, and I thoroughly expect to live. My sister's 98, my brother's 95. So it's a challenge.
So that's great. So aging gave you the path. It opened the door for you.
It was like a new world.
So other people, how has your aging impacted your views on aging? What else?
I guess I'll briefly just say that I've also been studying aging since I was, 25 or something. It's been my career's focus as an anthropologist, and now I just turned 60. And I don't want my students to think that the only reason I'm interested in aging is because of personal reasons. So that's just a short answer. Otherwise, I haven't really quite figured out how it's impacted my aging, except maybe it will help me understand better, even better, my interlocutors, the people I do research with.
Well, so aging, hopefully it comes to all of us. And I think that struck me at one point was, aging is going to happen, and begin to plan for it and to build things into your life that help you to be more successful at it. And probably the most significant manifestation of that in my life is I'm about to move to a new home. It is handicap accessible. It's got ramps. It's got wide doorways. It has no thresholds. It's got grab bars. It's got stair lifts. It's got everything. And my son said, "You don't need that." I said, "I don't need it now. But, someday I may well. So why not put it in now so it's there if it's ever needed?" So I think what aging has done for me is just to begin to plan forward, look forward. And it's not only building in the things that are going to be helpful, it's building in the things like purpose. So it's build in structures that help you become successful at what you want to do, be the best person you can forever. And so...
I'm going to pick up on a theme that Lisa talked a little bit about in her opening comments, and that is that aging intersects with a variety of our other personal qualities and background characteristics. So our gender, our race, sexual orientation, ethnicity, and that's just to name a few. So what common and distinctive aging issues do you see at these intersections? Because we've been talking about aging as this very general, broad category, but it's very distinctive in how it plays out as we intersect with other categories. So if somebody wants to talk about that.
I'll jump in just a little bit more thinking about that intersectionality, because I think frequently the issues for LGBT older adults are a unique perspective on the issues that are more comprehensive for all folks who are older adults and aging. One of the things that I see is that there is a lot of ageism in the LGBT community. Some of it is particularly noticeable for gay men. There's an enormous amount of ageism. If you're over 30, you're done, over and done for. Some of that is also, however, tied to the experience around HIV, and that the idea of, what does it mean to be old? What does it mean to be frail versus what does it mean to be young and healthy? And so it adds an additional layer with that sort of experience and stigma about thinking about, who's old and what does that mean. And also that within our community, we are not necessarily having connections with other generations. And so the opportunity for younger LGBT folks to be interacting with folks along that age continuum can be really important. We've also seen it with some folks that we've worked with in creating and sustaining an LGBT Elders of Color group, because even within that, we've got subsections of identities, and for them, it has been so powerful to be able to come together and to be old and to be Black and to be gay all at the same time in the room, and not having to park one identity in order to be privileged to be in the room with others.
I wanted to say that one of the things I've been studying recently is socioeconomic status, income, and so people, I've worked with the elite, well-to-do older Americans. For instance, I want to say actually for a group, if you retire and are healthy, relatively healthy, and have enough money, I have found, just like larger studies show, that some of the very happiest years of your life can be during that phase, where you're just a little less stressed, a little more comfortable with yourself, more time to enjoy your breakfast and coffee, etc. But the lower income people that I've been working with in Waltham and subsidized housing units for older people often are much less physically healthy. I'm not a doctor, but I can just see, and then they tell me. And it's interesting also how many people who are of lower income say that they qualify for my study. If I hang up some flyers about an aging study, they might be 60, 62, 65, but the more elite people don't think of themselves as aging and qualifying for an aging study until 80, 85. And if you ask a more elite person how long you expect to live, they'll say 100, 90 or 100. And a lot of the lower income people say they expect to die by 70. And so that's something that we really need to think about as a society. I got to say, though, that some of the lower income people are less feeling embarrassed or anxious about that, though. Sometimes more acceptance of the fact that you can't be healthy forever. Sometimes blaming other people, like structural forces or the difficult working conditions they had, rather than internalizing and blaming myself. Ooh, somehow I failed. I'm not as healthy and fit as I used to be. What's wrong with me? So, there's pros and cons, but it's something that we really need to think about is class. And of course, I study aging in India too. I won't get into all that now unless I have time, but culture is a big part of it too. Just the cultural images about aging really powerfully impact the way you experience it yourself and what you expect out of it.
And so gender, socioeconomic status, age. There's another group that we haven't talked about, and that's sort of the functionally impaired. Someone who's got needs assistance in doing activities of daily living. And that's really age agnostic. And yet there's this sort of this functionalism within our society that relegates those folks into a different category. And so although there have been changes that are good, the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, so I'm looking out here at all the yellow lines at the sidewalks and all the curb cuts that were just recently put in. This is a huge change. 10 years ago, if you were in a wheelchair and you tried to get around Boston, you, at every block, hit a 6 or 8 inch impediment. Buses wouldn't let you on. Subways wouldn't let you on. So if we think about function and the need for accommodation within the structures of our society, then that's another group. And obviously that overlaps with ageism. But it's something to keep in mind, because all it takes for any one of us is to twist an ankle, and we're going to be wanting curb cuts.
Well, I think the point about diversity is really important, because we know as we get older we get more and more different, and I think this also relates back to the comment about public policy and practices that we need to think about with respect to disparities and diversity of experience within aging. Jan?
Hi, I just wanted to talk about I feel privileged to be part of the Sloan Research Network on aging and work. And my passion has to do with productivity and work. So I'd like to just comment on that intersection, because I feel so strongly that this is a moment in time where we need to see a trend, which is the fact that there are people, many people with inadequate savings who are going to live a long time, and pension reforms haven't happened yet, and in many cases, governments are going bankrupt because of inability. So we're going to need to work longer. And the question then is, how do we get the upskilling and the reskilling that's necessary, especially, for example, the digital skills, so that we empower older adults to be able to feel competent. We also have people who have gotten out of the workforce to care for their older parents or their spouse. What happens when that person dies and they're 60 years old and the workplace is filled with ageism? We need to be able to empower them to get that education that they need. So I think that the whole higher education system needs to be changed so that we can move in and out, and carry a portfolio with us so that we can continuously add new certificates, get our masters later in life, and get some help, public sector help to do that. So I think that there are some really exciting things going on in that arena, and I think it's a big focus for interest.
Really, age-friendly university fits right in there, so it's the new thing that we're going to have to really tackle. We've heard the word throughout our conversations today come up, the word successful aging. So let me pose this question. What does it mean to live healthy after 50? Are terms like successful aging, which is both in the research and literature, scholarly literature, productive aging, positive aging, are they helpful in advancing this idea, or are they harmful in advancing some of the issues around aging?
I'd like to speak to the positive aging, productive aging. I see that there are 6 dimensions of well-being, which provides a goal for each of us, because it doesn't matter what our level of ability is, we can still be able to exercise those 6 dimensions: physical, mental, social, emotional, vocational, and spiritual. We can exercise each of those dimensions, and each one of them is important to our well-being. Yes, that's also environmental wellness, which is important, and economic. We have much less control there, but we can, each of us, really do the job.
Well, but does it set up, though, a certain expectation for some people that as I age, I need to be productive, I need to be successful, I need to be something that maybe doesn't fit in with my self-sense?
J-Lo at 50 at the Super Bowl, right? Yeah. Everybody's hysterical about the new 50, that she is redefined based on who she is. And so I think sometimes I used to call it the Betty Whiteization. It was like she's 90-something and she's feisty and sassy and, totally with it, right? All those things. And does it give us an unrealistic expectation? How are we successful in our own best way, as opposed to this other idea? And what happens if the circumstances of your life don't allow you to be successful? I mean, I love that some of the points that you said are things that we can have control over regardless of the environment we're in. But when you're living in communities that aren't safe, if there's poverty, if you have chronic illness, if you don't have access to affirming and safe healthcare, then, is that failing aging, and is that your fault? Or is that something that we think about sort of as a community writ large?
Yeah, I guess I see it, building on what you both mentioned, as both an inspiring term for many people, the notion of successful aging, healthy aging. This panel even had healthy aging in its title, and maybe that's why many of us wanted to participate, to see how we can be healthy. It can be inspiring for many people. When I first started decided that I would study this and its underlying assumptions, I thought I would be even 100% critical, and I realized I shouldn't be, because many people are enjoying it. I think we are, as a culture, trying to put a much more positive spin on aging, change the narrative around aging in many positive ways. So to not see aging as only a decline, you have to give up, biology is destiny, it's going to suck. The whole healthy aging, successful aging movement rests on this notion that individuals can control, make the most of their life through lifestyle choices, etc. And it's something I'll try to keep doing. It's inspiring for many people, but it does, the flip side, the word successful is dangerous because it does imply that you can fail at it, and that's dangerous. So as I mentioned earlier, I think that we should maybe get rid of that term. Healthy might be okay. I think the way Jan described these things that we can all strive for, you could fill them in different ways. So you could be active even in your chair if you needed to, you know. So we need to be really open-minded about the way we think of health or successful. Really, what we're looking for is well-being. We want people to feel as happy as they can with their lives. And one thing I'll say, Dr. Aronson mentioned this also, we should be more comfortable with needing help with dependence. That's part of being human. We don't mind it when our kids need help. And we shouldn't mind it if you're older and you need some help too. And we are really weird as Americans, the way we really, really value independence so much and feel humiliated by any sign of dependence. That is actually unusual cross-culturally. And caring for people and receiving care can be very, very intimate and part of being human and just normal. And I think that's something we should all work for more in our society.
Yeah, and I think Dr. Aronson put it well. She really, I think, would say that successful is an other. It's an othering word. And to be very careful about using it, despite its positive connotations.
I think it's great that we have an intergenerational audience here today, so I'm going to pose an intergenerational question. Some have argued that ageism directed towards young people is as detrimental as ageism directed towards older adults. How do you see intergenerational relations playing out and how ageism is shaped and how ageism may be remedied? So somebody want to speak to their thoughts about intergenerational connections?
That's a public policy, by the way, because the Census Bureau has a measure called dependency, and everybody below the age of 16 and over the age of 65 falls into that category. So you can look at cities, for example, and the record of, you know, which one has the highest rate of dependency. And actually, there's, you know, it's fake. We have the greatest diversity in humanity. The older we are, the diversity is broader the older that we get, rather than being, you know, lockstep. So I think this is important, I think, to notice.
I get young students at Brandeis who are terrified by all the anti-aging messages they're getting at such a young age that you better put this cream on, otherwise you'll get wrinkles, and that will be the worst thing ever. And so, yeah, ageism hits us at all ages, and the term anti-aging also is that we accept it is so strange. We would never have a whole anti-woman industry or an anti-any other. Well, okay, but you couldn't label it that. So you couldn't say, I'm going to start the new anti-woman industry or the anti-any ethnic group industry, et cetera. But the fact that we accept that just shows how ageism is so pervasive throughout our society. But one thing that I'm working on in terms of intergenerational relations, it sounds a little maybe like the Evergreen program that happens at BU that one of you mentioned. There's this program called Sages and Seekers, kind of a weird name, but I've been implementing it at Brandeis, and so we have young students and people from the Brandeis Osher Lifelong Learning Institute do classes together. Also, they have speed dating and things like that with each other. And it's been really, really valuable, and the young students love it even more than the older participants. They both love it. The young students feel transformed, amazed, hopeful visions of their own aging, and also just love the historical perspectives that the older people have on various things like dating or marriage, et cetera. And it's just been really, really rewarding. So I think we need more of those sort of intergenerational opportunities in our society.
So one of the things I've been doing recently is changing my language and talking more about multi-generational. I think intergenerational still says me versus you, but we are along a continuum, and so all of us here are part of a generation, and giving folks those opportunities to share that. I think, again, particularly in the LGBT community, over 90% of LGBT folks are born into heterosexual cisgender families, which means that we don't benefit from the kind of cultural legacy that many of us, when we think about the homes that we're raised in, the people who teach us who we are and what our culture is about. And so particularly in our community, I'm really mindful that we've got young folks who don't know their history, who don't have any idea and don't see and have contact with any older adult, meaning they don't see a vision of what their life could become. So one of the things that we do during Boston Pride is that we have this opportunity. We have trolleys that we rent because folks can't walk the long walk, but we have older adults ride in these trolleys, and there's huge love. Also, everyone on the sidewalk is suddenly 12. That may be my getting older. But they can see each other. They can give some love and thanks to the folks who paved the way for them. And they can also see what their future might look like. And so it's important, I think, that we create those opportunities to learn across those levels. And you're right, to benefit that, I also will say, find me a teenager, I need to fix my phone. I don't, the technology divide, I think, is huge. And that's an ageism, right? I assume that somebody 20 can fix my phone. And I assume that I can't. Well, I can't. Right. So when is there a reality in that divide? And right, when do we think of it as something that can be empowering? And maybe there's an 80-year-old who can fix my phone, and if someone can help me, that's what I want to have happen.
I always think, recently I've been thinking about how ageism is more acceptable, and we can talk about it, think about birthday cards, think about all kinds of examples of what we freely say in public. The anti-aging piece is part of that. But then I was also thinking that that's a good thing in the sense that it allows us to be able to put it on the table and to talk about it in a way that would be more challenging to talk about it in terms of other social isms. So this leads me to, which I think is going to be our last question because we only have 2 minutes left. What, if anything, can we learn from other social movements to challenge and overturn age bias and discrimination? Is age and ageism different as a social bias than racism or sexism? And if so, how do we address it? Or how do we intersect ageism with other issues, social issues that we know are important and compelling?
I do think that this is a moment in time when the word inclusion is perhaps more important than any other in history, because it's with all the issues of immigrant justice and women's gender justice and LGBT, QT, I'm sorry. It's just all, it's out there. We're talking about it. It's wonderful. But it has to, we have to embrace. I love the fact that in this book, Louise Aronson talks about the power of imagination, that's so important as an aspect of wise wisdom with experience, that it embraces the world. And that's exactly, this is what we have to, that's essential now, because there are so many pressures that demand that we work together at the same time as there's so many pressures for division and violence.
I think we also have yet to have a social movement around aging, right? There's oppression, and then some people somewhere decide they're going to speak up, and they're going to try and push back. And I don't think we have done that yet. You know, people have to stand outside of a pharmacy or, the greeting card store and say, these cards are objectionable. All the old, oh, you're over 40, it's all over for you. I mean, I just don't think that we've collectively gotten to that point yet.
It might be partly because we have so much internalized ageism.
Right.
Don't you think?
And I think that Dr. Aronson also said, own it, all right? So you are who you are. Be who you are. Be proud of who you are. And I think that's been sort of the root of so many of the other liberation movements. Black is beautiful. Gay is beautiful, right? Old is beautiful. So
But we laughed when he said that. He hesitated too a little.
But be who you are and be proud of who you are. I think that's the important piece.
And we're lucky to have lived that long.
Yes.
Amen.
Yes.
So look at that. We stopped at exactly the right time. Aren't we good?
But for your Q&A, right?
Is that great? But we do have time for questions from the audience, and then we'll finish up with final comments from our panel.
Hi. I want to know what the long-term medication effects are on the elderly.
So I'll probably take that one.
Yeah.
Okay. The long-term medication effects. Well, that's a pretty complicated topic. And it's complicated for a lot of reasons. One is that most of the common medications that we use have never been tested in people over the age of 65. And it's only recently, as Dr. Aronson mentioned, that studies out of the National Institutes of Health are requiring sampling of the full age range of people for medication safety. So we've got medications that have never been tested in a group whose physiology is different and whose side effect profile is different. So start there, and you can see that in others we don't know, and although we have lots of evidence to show.
Necessarily be extraordinarily worried about it if you've been taking medications for a long time that's been helping.
Well, that's true, except that the medication isn't changing, but we are. So there's a chance. It depends on the kind of medication you're taking, but the unfortunate thing is safe medications don't necessarily stay safe. Common painkillers, for example, ibuprofen, which is fine if you're younger, but it can be really bad. Yeah, but this is over the counter. Same with prescriptions. It doesn't. Again, the physiology is different. So be highly skeptical of medications. As a geriatrician, one of my jobs is to pare down the medication list. So I spend more time removing medications than I do prescribing them.
So it's important for us to ask our doctors about that question, be upfront about it, right?
Yeah, and do I need it?
They don't know.
And they don't know. Yeah, no. Yeah, it's easier to give you a prescription than to talk to you about it.
Hi, I have the next comment or question. Jan, it's wonderful to see you again. I've met you many years ago. I'm working right now with a group called Encore Boston Network, and which is trying to model Shift Online. We want to grow up and be Shift, which is one of the programs you funded. Anyway, the work I'm doing right now, I'm talking to a lot of people who have either been pushed out of the workforce after the age of 50, had to stop working to deal with an elderly parent who was sick, or what other circumstances, and they're now trying to get back in. Some of these folks are 70 years old, 65 years old, and they've had long, successful careers. And they're facing ageism in a big way. So one of the things we're trying to do is to help them learn how to sell themselves as an older person, as an old person, by being proud of their age and talking about what they can bring to the new workforce at their age. And I think one of the employers, one of the big complaints is they look at your resume, see you've got 40 years of experience, and assume you're 60, 70 years old. And you can get somebody to come to work for you much younger, much faster, much cheaper, right? And so we're trying to help with some of the messaging that one that one presents to a potential employer that talks about the advantage of bringing me into your workplace, what I can do as an older person, things like mentoring younger staff and promoting the skills that you do have. I was wondering, because we were talking about language, if any of you had suggestions about promoting yourself as a 70-year-old prospective employee.
I think you actually hit on a lot of the important points. And our role as mentors, I think, is really important because we bring a perspective. The other thing that we bring is far more reliability and stick-to-itiveness, if I might. And that's not to be pejorative for the younger generations, but they haven't been around as long. And so the perspective comes with time, and that's what we own. And I think that's one of our huge values. And that itself, a stabilizing force in an employment situation is hugely important.
I have a colleague at Olin College of Engineering who studied a small needle factory in the suburban town of Needham here, where the average age of the employees was, I can't remember, 72 or something. It's called Retirement on the Line. But that company actually sees older people as the best employees for various reasons, their reliability. And
I own my own business. I know.
oh, great. Okay.
I have people working for me over 70. They're the best workers.
Right. So yeah, you could talk to her and read this other book and get inspiration there. Sometimes older people also, if they already have some savings or they have Medicare or something, they don't always need as much health insurance too. So fewer benefits. I don't know if that's exploitation or not, but it can be a way to sell yourself as well too.
I also would add that, this is one of those issues where, is it the responsibility of the individual to fight the practice, or is it the institutional level that we need to address things? And as Louise and Tom were talking, and they talked a little bit about this employment piece, I thought to myself, we have to show people that even if you have somebody who happens to be there for 2 years, because they're 85 or whatever. Imagine having certain people only there for 2 years, and who they are and what they have to share. So there's ways that we have to figure out how to get employers and business and all of us who might be employers or business or in that job space to think differently about age and talent.
I just want to make one point because it is the case that the average length of, if I were to hire 2 people, and they were one of them was 30 years old and the other one was 60 years old, the 60-year-old is more likely to be there 7 or 8 or 10 years than the younger person who is likely to leave within 3 years. So, it's really longevity in the job is actually to the advantage, if we were really looking in a comparative way, for the older worker.
And the data is coming out from research to show that age-diverse work environments tend to be more productive, they're more enjoyable for people, and to figure out how are they leveraging that age diversity in a way that benefits your company. Other questions?
I just have one other question. Appreciate how you are really changing the narrative around aging and well-being, but I was concerned about what Dr. One of you, I forgot who, Dr. O'Malley said about gerontology focusing more on the clinical side rather than the well-being side. Do you see any changes coming down the pike so we can attract a lot of new gerontologists to work on the whole body?
And so so gerontology and geriatrics, I'm going to split hairs with you, but geriatrics is actually the clinical side of gerontology. There is, the wellness movement is seeping into geriatrics. It's sort of the analogy, though, I first learned about public health as the story was, a person was finding bodies floating down the river and had to keep pulling them out. And when asked what he was doing, he's saying, and why wasn't he trying to figure out why things were happening? He said, well, I'm so busy pulling bodies out of the water that I don't have time to go upstream to see who's pushing them in. And it's the same thing about wellness. So geriatrics, there are something like 10,000 geriatricians in the country and 50 million folks who are potential customers. So how do you focus that workforce? And it's very different. And wellness is critical. Again, it's how do you keep, who's pushing them in? And it's going to be wellness that's going to keep them out.
And I think also there's some thoughts about, functional ability, right? And so it's the medical end of it, but it's also access to food, transportation, all of those things that get the soft sell. And as a social worker, they're the things that, don't get considered to be as important. And we know things like loneliness. Right now there's a statistic out that the impact of loneliness is the same as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And so what are we doing? How do you prescribe social contact and connection for people, thinking that will support them in their aging?
So I see we only have 5 minutes left, and since we're a perfect panel and have been on time for everything, I'm going to ask our panelists each to give us their final thoughts to this question. So we've had a wonderful conversation today around aging. What's the change in public conversation that you'd like to see happen moving forward regarding aging?
I like to think lifespan, everything. Opportunities, because I think that early childhood education, to me, early childhood development is equally important to, and I think that we should be able to think about this all the way. But what goes along with that is what some of you in the audience are expert in, which is coaching, mentoring, life work planning. We need to encourage young people to be doing that. It's active, it's experiential. We need to be sure that we build in midternships along with the virtual learning or the classroom learning. Same thing with young people. I live on Cape Cod. We're doing an intergenerational model UN in 2 weeks. And thanks to having the Greater Boston United Nations Association, which will be very helpful to you in thinking about doing one in your community. Ours is going to be on food security. We match up and represent a country, each of us, 8th graders, 11th graders, and an older adult. That kind of deliberate interaction on issues of our time is such fun. And it's, to me, what we're talking about. It's involving people of all ages. And I just want to say, Joanne, that if other people aren't aware of the LaSalle community, which is built on the LaSalle campus, where when you go, there's a waiting list, I believe, of people who want to live there. When you live there, that means that you also sign up for a physical fitness program, that you do volunteering, and that you'd have some education program going. And, that's what our retirement community should look like. As Gloria Steinem said last week, when she was 82 years old, she said, my life is my work. She said, retirement? That's ridiculous. I'm not going to retire from life.
It's hard to follow that one. It was something just struck me as I was thinking that the importance of balance, right, of what is positive about aging, also recognizing the things that are more negative. We have spent a good deal of time here today talking about aging and growing older, and we have not talked about dementia once. And is that, overlooking something that's significant and important? Yes, but it also hasn't precluded us having other kinds of conversations that maybe we wouldn't have had opportunity to talk about other aspects around growing older as well. And so I think holding those balance, thinking about the legacies that have been given to us and the legacies that we can offer to folks who come after us, I think is also incredibly important. And so I ask each of you, try and think of 3 things that you really value about the stage of life that you're in right now. Push back on that the internal ageism we carry with us. I can't see as well with my glasses, right? Think about what you really own and value and how you can continue that kind of thinking about sort of appreciation for where you are in life, and think about what that will look like 10 years from now.
That's nice. I was at a yoga class the other day, and the teacher, they often say, don't compare yourself to the people around you. You are who you are here on this mat. But she also that time said, and don't also compare yourself to your earlier self, your earlier body. Be here now. So I thought that was really nice advice. Also, I'll close by recommending Ursula Le Guin's collection of essays that she wrote in her 70s and 80s called No Time to Spare. Some of you may have read it. And one thing, it's just full of insights and wit. One thing she comments on when people say to you, you're like, oh, you're not old. Oh, you don't look, oh, you're 80. Oh, you don't look 80. Oh, you look so good. She said, don't tell me all that. I am 80. And she says, to tell me my old age doesn't exist is to tell me I don't exist. Erase my age, you erase my life, me. So the message we've all been saying, we should all own our age and make it acceptable and normal with its good and bads, and make it meaningful and vital as possible.
And so let me close then with the word inclusion, which again Jan used. And inclusion not only means welcoming someone into your group, it really means, and I think for us in the room, pushing out to be welcomed in other groups. So you can't sort of sit back and passively wait for someone to say, we're going to include you. You have to step up, move out, and do it. And I think inclusion is going to be the key for society going forward. We need every part of society to succeed.
Well, it's only Monday, but I hope you will all go home tonight and get that bottle of wine and have this conversation with your family and friends about aging. But I also would like to invite you back to BU on April 27th for the Massachusetts Gerontology Association Forum on Aging. There was a handout on the table describing some information about that, and I hope you'll join us again for that conversation. So thank you, everyone. This was wonderful. I had a great time. I hope everybody else had a great time and learned something. Thank you. Perfect. We're at 0 again. Stars have lined up.
You just verified that you're perfect. I've known that for a while.
All right.
Before you all take off, thank you very much for coming, because without you here, it would have been fairly lonely for us to sit here and talk to ourselves. And thanks to all of our speakers. Louise is no longer here, but she's not, that's not the way to put it. She's over at the Weston Seaport doing TED-Med. Thanks for all coming. Thanks for the speakers. Thanks very much to CitySpace for giving us the opportunity and the platform to do this. As I said, their new branding is what's happening is here. And what's happening is we're all aging, and we're all here. So maybe that's the good news of the whole thing. I just want to mention that this is the first in a series of 4 programs, with a 5th being added that will take place. The next one will take place in the fall at Boston College, the Center for Aging and Work. And the title of that program is The Protective Power of Purpose: Work, Service, Caregiving, and Learning, namely meaning, making a difference, and a positive attitude add years to life. There may be an interim program. We're working with the Massachusetts eHealth Institute. They've asked us to consider putting on a program about aging and caregiving technologies, and that might be in the September-October timeframe. You'll also receive an email, a survey Joanne will send out, and we very much would appreciate your sending it back. It'll be short and sweet, and send it back because we'd like to get your feedback on that. On a personal note, I sort of was in on the conception of CitySpace, and I couldn't be happier and prouder to see what WBUR has done. When I joined BUR in 2000 in various ways, I've always thought of it as a public good. Namely, it builds social capital, and certainly CitySpace is an element of that. Thank you very much to the staff for all the support. Thank you, Alex.